Earlier this week, I spoke with Dr. Sarah Burrows from Queen's University about the growing issue of Canadian small businesses shutting down due to the increasing number of retiring owners. Now, this issue has been named the Silver Tsunami, and its effects have been documented in a recent study by MNP, a business advisory firm out of Calgary. And here to talk about that study today is Kerry Smith, National Leader, Family Office Services at MNP. Kerry, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to this.
Can you maybe just give a quick description of what does MNP do?
So we're a full service accounting, tax, and advisory firm. We're proudly Canadian owned and we're coast to coast. We really focused in on the mid-market in Canada, which really does represent a significant portion of Canadian businesses in Canada. So I think that's really exciting. For us as accountants, as people would call us, we really do try to focus going beyond the financial statements and the tax returns when we work with our clients and really do become that trusted advisor to them in all facets of their business.
What do you do in your role there?
Our team really focuses in on three key areas when we work with our clients. One of them being succession planning, which I think we're going to talk a little bit more about today. Another part of that is building out a financial roadmap for our clients. So really helping them to understand the assets they have both in the business and the personal world and how they're going to evolve over time, how they're going to serve the family and their goals and their needs. And the third part is really looking at their estate plan from a strategic standpoint, understanding philanthropic goals, and really helping clients to pull together that family balance sheet and helping them understand that on a reporting basis, month to month or year to year.
Now, we're talking about this month because of this report that MNP put out this year. Can you give just a quick outline of what was talked about in the report?
What we did was we gathered about 550 responses of business owners and leaders across the country, really just to get a better understanding of where they were in their succession journey. Interestingly enough, if we go back 10 years and we think about succession planning and that conversation in the business community, it really wasn't something we talked about. It wasn't front of mind for advisors. It wasn't front of mind for business owners themselves. But as advisors, we started to see into the future and realizing, wow, we've got this massive wave of business owners who are going to start to get older and something's going to happen with these businesses. And so that's when the ball really started to roll, when we were having these conversations, really trying to educate people. And so when we took in all this information, we've now shifted that focus from not talking about it to really seeing that business owners are thinking about it. And they're thinking about different aspects of their succession plan. So they're thinking about big ticket items, my timeline, who I might sell or transition my business to, what does the dollar value look like? So they're thinking about it. That gap, though, that we're trying to close is really putting those thoughts and putting pen to paper and taking that action. So that's really our report is really showcasing that while business owners are thinking about it, we're missing that key important step now of really starting to document that and put actions into place.
It's not something you maybe a small business owner or entrepreneur might think about when they're first starting off, but I know I can attest to in my travels across the country, recording stories for Yes, We Are Open and meeting up with these family-run businesses. And there used to be a time where it was almost a foregone conclusion that the children would take over the parents' business. But in the stories that I told, in many cases, that's not true. As usually kids want to do their own thing. What happens to these small businesses? And a lot of them are shutting down. And that's what your report is showing. So succession planning, that's why it's important. In the report, I keyed in on this phrase, business dynamism is on the decline in Canada. What does that mean?
Yeah, no, that's a great thing to pick up on. And that was part of a Stats Canada report. When we look at dynamism and we look at how we measure that, it's really looking at entry rates into business, exit rates out of business, and really the growth rates of those businesses. So it's the beginning, the middle, and the end, and we're looking at what's acting there, right? So when there's a decline, we're generally either seeing fewer new businesses being launched. It could be that existing businesses are growing more slowly, or there's fewer exits of those businesses. And so it could be a combination thereof of those different aspects. When we looked at our report and we were seeing where business owners were struggling, and we saw that report from Stat Canada, I think that growth rate of business slowing down may be partially due to business owners getting close to that next phase and really just having uncertainty of what the next steps looks like for their business. Yeah. And so when you have that uncertainty and you're maybe not sure your next steps are, that can sometimes close down in on business's ability to grow. And so without having that succession plan and not having that clear path forward, it can trickle down into the performance of the business.
Now, when you're starting a business, retirement seems so far away. You're focused on building that business and making it work. How early in the process would you recommend that people start thinking about these business plans?
I love getting asked this question all the time because I think it's this sort of automatic conclusion that, well, I wait until I'm maybe 5 years out or 3 years away, and then I start to thinking about retirement and doing all these things I need to do. When we meet with business owners, we always say that's something you should start from the very beginning. And I think there's misconception on what a succession plan is, because I think generally people think of this massive 50-page document that highlights all these different things. And while at the end of your life cycle and you're getting ready to transition that business, absolutely, it should be a very detailed and complex document. At the beginning, it simply could just be one page. And so we always tell business owners, look, even from the beginning, you should be thinking about the future and what it's going to look like. And that's naturally part of business anyways. You're always going to be looking forward. But if you start thinking about big picture items, and when we think about succession planning too, as a business owner, you kind of have three main options, right? It's transition to family, sell to management and or employees, or find a strategic third party to acquire the business. And so if those are generally your three options, even if you just start there and think to yourself as a business owner, how would those three look for my business today? If you don't have kids yet, or there's no one within the family, then okay, that's not an option today. But hey, if I do start a family, that might interest me. If you're a company of one or two, maybe the employee option isn't there. And so maybe a sale to a strategic third party makes sense today. But again, thinking about that process early on and what does the future look like, who's going to be there, I really think is an important part of the process of being a business owner. And then again, these plans are not static. They're meant to be fluid. And so the idea too is that you're revisiting this every year because things will change. Your business will grow. You may add more employees. Your family may grow. Economic conditions can come in or out that may impact your business. And so a lot of this changes. And so it's really important that you're revisiting this and updating that. And naturally, that document will start to build on itself as you get deeper and deeper into your business life cycle.
So can you maybe tell us an example of a business plan done well?
Absolutely. It's always nice to be asked that question. I think sometimes people are interested in the opposite of that, but for the bad stories, there's always a bunch of great stories as well. And I can think of one client, and they really took it to heart on that whole starting early piece. And I remember they used to have this really big visual every time I'd go see them. And it was always the big picture ideas for the future. And so it was documenting high level, who would be there and what roles would they play. And then they would look at the different off-ramps, which I just talked about, and they called them off-ramps. And so it was sale, employee sale, or keep it in the family. And it was always just this big picture document. And for years, it was always getting updated. What does these look like? How do things change? They were already on second generation. So 2 generations were working together. Interestingly enough, the generations working together were in-laws, wasn't actually direct from that aspect. But it was great to see because they had a very strong vision for the business and what the business was. And they were able to directly tie that into what the future looked like from a succession standpoint because they knew who they were and they were able to take that big picture thought. Now we're deeper into the process. Now things are becoming a lot more complicated and detailed than what we have documented just with regards to being a family employee, being a family owner. What does that look like? How is a transition plan going to happen? And they're really looking at 2 options, which is 3rd generation transition or potentially to employees. That's where they've really honed in on. So now we're looking at what do those options look like? Interestingly enough, no, they still always revisit that sale to a strategic third party more to help them reinstill that the first 2 options fit who they are as business owners and who they are as family members. So I think that's just a great story when I work with that client and that group. I just love seeing the evolution that they've encapsulated.
Now, I like focusing on the positive stories first, obviously, but there are risks. If you don't have a succession plan in place, obviously you can sell or shut the business down, but what are some of the other risks that you might encounter?
Yeah, interestingly enough, I think you're right there where when we think about not having a succession plan and businesses being impacted, we naturally go to the decrease in value and the loss of what that might look like. And 100%, I believe that's obviously something you want to focus on and think about. But when we talk to clients about it, and when we talk to anyone about it, in reality, there's the two quiet things in the background that sometimes get overlooked that we always like to talk about. And so the first one is the impact on the employees. And so when we think about small businesses in Canada, there's many people in this country rely on their livelihood by being employed by these businesses. And so if these businesses don't have succession plans or are not able to be going concerns into the future, there's a significant risk to those who are employees of these businesses who are going to obviously feel the impact in their own personal lives. So there's that aspect to think about too on why succession planning is so critical and the impact. And the other one is the impact on the family. And so when we think about family-owned businesses or someone that's in the family that's involved in a business and maybe the others aren't, there's a lot of stress that can generally be put on that family because family and business always end up mixing over, and there's always the potential for conflict. And understanding that the family has to go through stress too, that business is putting food on the table. And so there's just always that impact on the family, and what does that do as well? That we want clients to be mindful of why this is so important outside of the obvious, which is that decrease in value we talk about.
In my travels, as I mentioned, sometimes it wasn't that the kids didn't want to take on the family business. Maybe they were just still too young or not experienced enough or not ready to do so. These days, families are starting later and later, right? What are some of the options that you can do where it's maybe the next generation wants to take over, but just aren't quite ready yet?
Yeah, so when we look at that, the first thing we would talk about, if the business and the client and the family is really set on that family transition piece, a lot of what we would do in working with our clients is helping to educate and prepare that next generation. It starts off as assessing that generation of where they are today from a skill set, what do they have, understanding then where the shortfalls are and the gaps are that we would need to close, and then helping to build out an education program and training program to help get them there. Part of that, though, may also be that they want to bring in employees and they want employees to be part of that ownership. And so we talk a lot about employee ownership plans as well in Canada. And really, that's a great option. And when we talk about options for succession, when we say sale to family, sale to third party, or sale to employees, they're not exclusive of one another. We're starting to see a lot more hybrid versions of these where in a scenario like that, maybe we are keeping a piece for the family, but the other part of the business is now going to go to employees through some form of employee ownership plan. And it's a great option. When we talked before about the risk of not having a succession plan, one of the impacts is the impacts on the employees. What better way to try and help avoid impact to the employees by having them part of ownership and having a piece of the pie and being a part of the growth and the succession of that business. So the employee ownership plan is a really great option for families when looking at their succession plan. It's really important when doing something like that, though, that you are working with a group of advisors who do focus in on this space and truly understand. As we were talking before, there's a lot of different options when it comes to employee ownership plans, different structures. There's been some recent announcements too from CRA as to how you may want to structure those. And so it's really important for business owners to sit down with a professional and understand what are all those employee ownership options in front of them? How does that look? Because a lot of them will have pros and cons really based on what is the outcome that family is looking for and what's going to meet the needs of the business too, which is really important. Two separate conversations at the end of the day.
It makes a lot of sense. Now, if folks wanted to learn more about succession planning, where would you direct them?
Number one, start the conversation with the right professional is the best first step. Can sometimes be the hardest part, which is starting, but it's the best part. Two, remember these plans are not static, they are fluid. And so when we talked about before, how early should you start? It can be really simple as just a one pager and looking at those off ramps. How do those look in my business today? Obviously, I would encourage your readers to go to our website, np.ca/family office, where they can read more about the report in detail. We've also just released an updated version of the report that's just focused in on the real estate and construction industry in Canada. So a lot more focused on that sector. And obviously at the end of the day, I'm always happy to chat with anybody that has any questions and want to learn more about succession planning and what does that look like for you. But I always go back to start the conversation with the right person. It's the hardest step, but it'll be the best step you can take.
I'll include links to everything we talked about in this conversation in the show notes. Kerry, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. It was fantastic.